from Clarkston, Michigan, the greatest city in the world. It's the Jose Aliaga Show. Jose Aliaga knows everyone. Get to know him as he interviews some of the most fascinating people from the greater Independence Township area. And now, broadcasting from the studios at Clarkston High School, the home of the state champion Wolves, here's Jose Aliaga.
Welcome to the Jose Aliaga Show. Today I have a special guest, and I know that Jimmy Kimmel is going to be really, really jealous of me, like always they do. Anyways. Oh, by the way, for Jimmy Kimmel, I think Guillermo is getting very popular lately anyways, but it's just my opinion, but he's getting more popular around. Today I have a special guest. His name is Jacob Cornea. Most people confuse him with the guy that played in the Avengers movies. If you see the Avengers, I love that movie. He plays like Thor. The guy who played Thor actually looks like him, and many people think it's him sometimes. How you doing, Jacob?
I'm well, Jose. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, me too, me too. Well, Jacob is actually a bachelor's degree at University of Michigan in history. And today we're going to talk a very good topic. I was talking to him earlier about President Teddy Roosevelt, one of the Republican presidents in the beginning of the 1900s, which is very interesting because he became president after William McKinley got assassinated, got shot, and a few days later, it was on September 14, 1901 in Buffalo, New York, he got shot, and that's when Teddy Roosevelt became president. And before I start with the specific questions, I will ask you this. Who is the youngest president of the United States?
Well, the youngest president is actually Theodore Roosevelt. Many people think it's JFK, and that's often a common trivia night error. JFK was the youngest elected president in 1960, but Theodore Roosevelt's the youngest man to ever assume the office, which he did when McKinley was executed.
Oh, very interesting, because it's true. When I go around and I ask people, who is the youngest president of the United States? I don't ask, who is the youngest president by election of the United States?
That's right.
People says, Kennedy, Kennedy, Kennedy. Everybody says Kennedy, but no, it's true. It's Theodore Roosevelt. I actually look at it today. I want to make sure that the facts are right, and you're absolutely right. Very interesting. Very interesting. So let's start with the questions, because people, history is your mayor. So many politicians, such as Bernie Sanders or like Elizabeth Warren, utilize the term identify as a progressive. How are they similar and different from Theodore Roosevelt at the progressive of today? What is the connection there?
Well, the term progressive is a hot button word. It has a good feel and a good sound. It makes it sound like progress. Individuals like that would actually align in Roosevelt's time as being a member of the Socialist Party, which was led by Eugene Debs. There are some similarities that you'll see. For example, progressives such as Theodore Roosevelt and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren all favor massive infrastructure improvement. That was a hot button topic, particularly in the Midwest. A lot of support could be found there for those activities. Sewer socialism was actually a phrase used to show how the internal workings of states such as Wisconsin were improved during that time. Roosevelt and those progressives also favored that. You also see certain similarities, if one will, with nature. Roosevelt was a big conservationist. We have Teddy Roosevelt National Park, for example, where you also find environmental issues key today. But the main differences are people like Theodore Roosevelt favored an assimilation of immigration. He favored a strong, tough America, a very masculine America. You don't really see that with the progressive movement today. They like a regressive, almost if one will, a parental type form of progressivism, where the people are taken care of. The merits such as free tuition, one's not exactly earning their way through life. They're more exactly being handed an opportunity to kind of float on by. So by not investing in their, if you will, life goals and whatnot, they're not exactly living up to that progressive in the sense where Roosevelt would have been more one could say he would want somebody to take part, to have to, for example, pay for their education, to be active, have a strong military, be sort of a power, be, if you will, a go-getter.
When you're talking about a strong military, you're talking about when he, before he became president, actually he signed up to lead America against it was in the Cuban War, right? Against the Spanish.
He resigned as the Secretary of the Navy to form the Rough Riders.
Right. That was very interesting, very patriotic too, that he actually led to a victory. It's interesting. So he have actually, I think he was a pro-gun too, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember he was really tough guy. He went to
he
Africa
was.
and killed some lions. There's a picture
He went
of him.
he went on several expeditions to Africa. After the election in 1912, he went to South America. So he was a well-traveled, very resourceful individual.
Yes, he was. So which progressive did you like? Theodore Roosevelt or Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders?
I'm more of a Theodore Roosevelt fan myself.
Why?
Because I like the you can do it, you can rise up and become somebody. Roosevelt, while he was born into great wealth, he went out to the Badlands and the Dakotas. He sort of learned the rugged cowboy, if you will, the brutality of life for everyday people going out west and settling. And so he's kind of a self-made individual. He had to conquer a debilitating asthma condition as a child. He had to do a series of really intense physical regimens throughout his life, almost on a daily basis to remain active. He sort of rose up to the occasion. And that's what I personally like about Roosevelt.
He was well-liked and well-respected at the time. He, after the first term that he got actually assumed as a vice president, became president after McKinley died, then he went for a first election and he got elected by promising people that he won't see a second term.
Exactly.
Because it was, and he delivered his promise. Even though he knew that people wants him to stay here, and the law allowed him to stay for one more term, he believed in what he promised and he says, I'm not doing it anymore. And Taft became president.
Yes.
But after the 4 years of Taft, he wasn't continue the policies that Roosevelt wanted. And
exactly.
And that was a problem.
Yes.
And then, as you know, the Taft won the primary election, but Roosevelt knew the primary wasn't that okay. And he knew he was more popular for November election, as you know. In the primary, just certain amount of percentage of people cast their votes. But in the November election, the most majority actually goes there and it plays a lot of things, name recognition, popularity, and so many things. And actually, Roosevelt ended up getting more votes in the president than Gomba, which is tough. But Woodrow Wilson ended up winning because they split up the conservative into. It was kind of interesting what happened because Roosevelt, he was very popular because no more because he was a kind of celebrity, it's what he did, what he means for America.
Exactly.
He was a great president. Well, I have a second question.
Okay.
How did Roosevelt make such a large appeal to many Americans?
Well, the main thing that set Roosevelt apart from other politicians was he broke away from the corruption. He was seen as a very authentic and genuine being. At this time, you had big corporations that were influencing the government, very similar to today, if you will. But you also had a lot of political corruption when we think about established politicians who keep being reelected and say and do whatever they want. And people at that time, like now, were fed up with it. And when Theodore Roosevelt came on the scene, he was seen as very virtuous, very independent, very honest, very trustworthy. When he served in the police with New York, he was known for confronting criminals, like face-to-face challenging them, and people like that. He was seen as a very, if one will, seen as very assertive, and he was seen as very to-the-point type individual that many people like today. There wasn't any, if one will, there wasn't any lying, there wasn't any fabrication. He was very straightforward. He wanted to get done what he wanted to accomplish, and he was going to work hard to do it. And people liked that.
So do you think in the way you're describing 1901, there was a big change for America. You're describing, it has some similarities. I'm not saying equal or the same. I say similarities, which is not quite the same, between Theodore Roosevelt and Donald Trump.
You could say that there are some similarities there. One of the main differences is where Trump lived his whole life in wealth and privilege, going to an Ivy League school and whatnot. Roosevelt went out to the Badlands. He was pretty much a dirt poor cowboy for a while, at least lived that life. He had to dress raggedly. He had to sleep outdoors at times, go on the long winter rides to inspect and make sure that his herds of cattle were together. So he had very much a if you will, a gritty type presence. He wasn't always clean cut and polished. Even when he was in the military, he resigned to be from being the Secretary of the Navy to going and forming the Rough Riders. He was also in the National Guard briefly. So he had sort of a, while he was a wealthy and privileged man, and he came from the distinguished Roosevelt family, he also had a very direct appeal to many people at that time that, yeah, I was out west, yes, I helped settle that region, yes, I encountered the violence and the difficulties that you face, yes, I fought in war, I actually rode in war into battle, so he had that experience that made him very relatable and well-liked to many people of the time.
Yeah, he was a former governor, very young too. He probably was one of the youngest governors we ever had too. Yeah,
he was effectively appointed governor upon returning from the war.
Oh, wow.
Because of his popularity. The Republican Party saw they were going to lose that election because they had become so corrupt, and Roosevelt was seen as a fresh face.
Oh, interesting, interesting. Very interesting.
Very much so.
I wish we have people like that, you know, in this time. More
it
people
would be
like
nice.
that. It would be nice, yeah. Did Roosevelt share some similarity feature with the Victorian South, like ideas that were socially popular during the political career?
Well, one of the things that progressives are often targeted for, looking back, and if you're trying to target modern progressives, is racism was very common during that time. This is a time of Victorian ideology with race superiority. You have different ideas such as eugenics, which was trying to scientifically prove that white Anglo-Saxon people were superior to non-white Anglo-Saxons. So Roosevelt was known for saying many things offensive about Native Americans. For example, he once said that 9 out of every 10 good Native Americans are dead. He once said blacks were not quality citizens, they were not worth citizenship. And so at times that was seen as very offensive. Woodrow Wilson regularly showed Birth of a Nation at the White House. It was one of his favorite films, and it portrayed the Ku Klux Klan as a great victorious people. And obviously, they're very wicked men. So that was a difficult thing. But one of the things when you look at Roosevelt's administration, he was the first president to ever select a Jewish individual for his cabinet, Oscar Strauss. He also selected many African Americans into federal positions. For example, the federal land office was the chief registrar was an African American. So he did make progressive steps. He even went as far as to say that we should start judging people by their merits and who they are as an individual, and not simply by the color of their skin. So as time went on, particularly after the Great War, and he saw many of what we might call ethnic whites and non-whites, such as Italians and Germans and the Polish and whatnot, fight, and he saw the bravery of these individuals and how people such as many African people, people of African descent, worked to help supply the war effort and went over and fought. He really started to emancipate himself from that and became seen as somewhat as a true progressive with race relations, trying to bring individuals out of that. He also championed female voting. He was very pro-female voting, so again, that was very radical for the time.
Of course, for that time, yes. So, do you think that Theodore Roosevelt shared the vision of Abraham Lincoln? Because Lincoln was the great emancipator.
In some aspects, yes, he did, but I think Roosevelt favored more of instead of just emancipation from slavery, he had to deal with, well, are these recently emancipated people, are they our equals? And obviously he said no, right? He said offensive things about a lot of different people early on. But as time went on, he was seen as more, I wouldn't like to say emancipator, more of an enabler, where he saw that people were proving through their actions, these minorities and women, that they were the equals, and they were the clear equals of white men, white Western European men. So that's where there's a difference. It's not so much freedom. He saw that while they had their freedom, that they deserve full rights and equality for the time, remember. Don't think so much in our time, but more for that time.
Yeah, of course, in that time was different.
Exactly.
Because, yeah. But do you know that Theodore Roosevelt was in the President Abraham Lincoln funeral when he was 6 years old? That was very interesting.
Oh, yes.
And William McKinley was the last president that fought in the Civil War.
Yes.
That's very interesting too.
Yeah, there was a string actually of consecutive presidents that were Civil War veterans.
Yes. So it's very interesting. So because I know after Theodore Roosevelt and Taft, we have Woodrow Wilson, who was kind of are racist for what
Yes.
the history says. I don't. It's not just my opinion. It's facts about the movie Birth of the.
He had prejudiced views that were common of the time.
Yeah.
It's important to remember people like Wilson and Roosevelt were from the very wealthy, almost even beyond upper, but the wealthy and the elitists. The Roosevelts had been in the United States since the 17th century. And so they had a very, if one will, a barrier almost to society. They often didn't see how the lower classes worked. They didn't see these individuals so much. They were statistics. Once the individuals started to see that these are human beings, once they started to see the human aspect of these groups, then they started to lighten up a bit. But yes, Wilson was a known racist.
Yeah, he was.
And he was born in Virginia. He was born in the South.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, he was, and the Democrat policy at that time was that kind of view.
Yes.
And probably the Kennedy, maybe kind of like that. And after, it's true. It's very true. You have any? We're gonna run a little bit out of time, but I have another question. Who is your favorite president of the United States?
My favorite, well, I like to say there's almost a group of presidents that I like the most. I really like, even though he had one of the shortest tenures in office, James Garfield is really unique to study because he's a true rags to riches story of his success and his rise and his hard work. I also am a fan of different presidents as well. I do like Theodore Roosevelt. He is very entertaining, and just his readings are very, very, very enlightening. And so there's all sorts of, being born in 1990, I like George H.W. Bush because he's the first president of my lifetime, so I enjoy studying him. But even presidents like Grover Cleveland, who started to do things like the veto power, and Cleveland was a very prominent, he's the only president to be elected on 2 separate non-concurrent terms. But his use of the veto power was very strong and influential, and it showed the power of the executive branch.
He was a Democrat, I think?
Yes, he was a Democrat.
He was the Ohio governor?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember. Yes, you're right.
He lost to Benjamin Harrison and then defeated Harrison the second time around.
Yeah. Well, it was very much his wife. He had a young wife, really young wife. It was like more than 20 years different, but she was really outgoing, and his wife said, "You're going back to office."
Yes,
and he helped him to run his campaign.
One of the issues, he had an illegitimate child, and at that time that was very controversial. Yeah. And so the taboo was strong. It was actually a tactic was used against him. People would sing songs in front of Democratic political offices and rallies to mock him.
Yeah, the Democrat, he was, one of the parties was saying, "Knock, knock, what is the baby?" And then his response is, "Here in the White House."
That's right, that's right.
That was the slogans right there, yeah. It was kind of interesting. I like politics too. My major is political science, so I like to read a lot of stories about political campaigns, and it's very interesting. What do I mean, the most brutal campaign ever see was Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams.
Yes, that was
according to
nasty.
history.
Yes,
it's the worst. You agree with that, or you think Trump, Clinton was the worst?
I would go with Jackson and Quincy Adams because they actually, their mothers became political issues. They started to mock each other's mothers, and when you get to family, that's pretty downright nasty.
Everything, yeah.
I mean, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton obviously have tainted pasts, and there's a lot you can kind of throw at their face that they can't necessarily deny. But you didn't see the personal bitterness so much. It was compared to how you would have back in the election of 1828. It was just nasty and rotten. But again, that was the first, what we could almost call the first uprising of the people. He was the common man's champion at that time. And so that a lot of that if you would call almost a backwoods being from Tennessee, that attitude started to rise up. And you saw it personified very well against what people saw as a wealthier Tidewater and New England group that had continuously ruled and dominated the political scene.
Yeah, actually, yeah. I mean, true. Actually, it was a movie I watched about, is in Hillary's America. It's about this guy, Dennis Souza. So where actually he talks about Andrew Jackson, how he was kind of the father of the Democrats, because he's the reason why the Democrats have a donkey in the
Yeah,
logo.
he was, yep.
Because they were calling jackass, and the slogan, he liked that so much and put the donkey as a symbol, and they stay with the donkey until now.
Exactly.
Many Democrats don't know that, but that's the main reason why Democrats have the donkey there.
And it was used to show that they were the common man and woman of that time.
Yeah.
It shows, you know, it prevents them from being seen as wealthy or elitist or you know, immune to the realities of life. It showed the Democratic Party, we are the common people's party.
Yeah. You know, I have the last question.
Okay.
Since we're talking who is the best president for you and all that, I want to know who was the worst president for you?
The worst president?
Yeah. I can give you some names. And
Well,
you can
no. Well, I would say it would be, and it's generally history regards him as one is James Buchanan, just because the way how he allowed the South to start to secede during the Civil War, and his seeming as a weak and ineffective ruler. Obviously, there were a lot of things beyond his control, but his lack of trying to keep the Union together and being more of a authority figure is definitely a reason of concern that I would say that makes him the worst. Is that the bloodiest conflict in the history of this country was pretty much due to his inactions. You can't solely blame him, but he could have done a lot more to try to prevent all the bloodshed and the violence and the sectarianism that had embedded it within the nation at that time.
Yeah. It's true. And he also was the only president that didn't bring a first lady to the White House, right?
Yes, he was a lifelong bachelor.
Yeah, he was bachelor, yeah.
Yep.
Interesting because I was expecting also you to say maybe Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy Carter, well, there were a lot of bad happenings, and Carter was seen as a weak and ineffective ruler. But again, the presidency being more of you can't always blame every bad happening for the president. So I just say Buchanan just because of the national collapse that was seen during his. And while there were issues such as inflation, the Iran hostage crisis, while Carter was president, and while those were difficult events and tragic in the Iran hostage situation, it is still losing 600,000 of our own citizens is perhaps the most horrific happening that you can imagine. So that's why I go with Buchanan. In contemporary America, you could definitely argue Carter, but I look from 1 to 45, and 15 stands out the most to me.
Okay, no, it's good. No, I mean, you bring good facts about what happened in Buchanan, left the country divided in two. He couldn't keep it together, and then, no, I agree with you. That was a difficult time, and we're glad that the Republican Party at that time was formed, and Michigan and Jackson was the first actually convention where Abraham Lincoln came, and he ran against, for the Senate, against Stephen Douglas. And it's interesting because he lost the election, but 4 years later, he became the President of the United States.
That's right.
Beating the same opponent, Stephen Douglas.
Yep.
How life is, no? You know?
It is fascinating.
Yes. Well, Jacob, thank you so much. It was
thank you
very
for
interesting.
having me.
I mean, it's very cool. I want to keep going, but I don't want to run out of time because Stefan, you know, Stefan is pushing there probably, and he says, Jose, come on, and, you know. But thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Jose.
I do appreciate a lot. It was very, very interesting. And I know a lot of people today learn a lot of things. And for everybody that want to have some comments or something, you guys can go to our page, I mean, the Jose Aliaga Show on Facebook, and put nice comments, yeah. If you have any bad comments, like I said before, don't put anything. I appreciate that. But I know most of it are going to be good anyways. If you want to come to the show, please, you can call us at 248-736-7163. Again, 248-736-7163. And also you can follow us on the Facebook page, The Jose Aliaga Show. Thank you so much. That's all for today, and God bless you.